The Christian Americans in the West really struggle with this idea of self rather than purpose. And that's exactly what this Haggai is going to remind God's people. They have an identity crisis.
Let's welcome people in and talk about it.
All right, let's do it.
Welcome. Now let's talk about it. Welcome to the ReThink podcast. We're starting a new study teaching set here for just a few weeks. We're going to be done. This is a month? How long we do this?
3 weeks. 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And then we're singing Christmas songs.
Which I told my life group there were 3 chapters in Haggai because I just assumed we had 3 weeks. There's 3 chapters. And we get to group on Tuesday, and they're like, "Where's the 3rd chapter?" And I'm like, "Oh,
You're still
there's
writing
only
it.
2."
You know,
There's only 2.
they
were
very short.
Googling it, trying to figure out where the
I
third
was just
one
talking about how Levi is our in-house fact checker. But this really makes me question, like,
We need like a bleep buzzer.
yeah. Come on, Levi.
Apparently, we're doing 2 weeks on chapter 2.
What kind of false teaching are you spreading around here?
Why are we doing that?
I don't know.
Well,
I wondered it when I
there's
was
4
studying
parts of the book.
There are 4 oracles.
Yeah,
And we're doing it in 3 weeks. I didn't understand that either.
we had to get time for Christmas. I don't know.
That's probably what it is.
Well, never mind. I'm not going to go on the holiday rant. You're fine.
Well, we may end up taking 4 weeks and just zap one of those Christmas weeks.
Forget the wonderful counselor.
Zap it. Pow. Gone.
Haggai. So, listening audience, knowing what you know about Haggai, are you excited?
Who are you
Studio
asking?
audience, are you excited?
Yeah.
Absolutely, he's lying. I wasn't pumped either. Haggai, what's the point? Give us the context, Andrew. You did it to your cult, your group.
Well, it is part of the minor prophets, which doesn't mean importance, but length. Because
it's
there's
short.
2 chapters.
2 chapters, Levi. Fact checked. 2. So, yeah, part of the minor prophets, and really what's going on here is Haggai is given a word from the Lord to remind the people who've come back out of exile.
21 times in 38 verses. This is the word of the Lord.
Yeah, because, okay, so 586.
Fact checking for you.
586, fall of temple in Jerusalem. They're exiled out of the thing no longer by the Babylonians.
Out of the thing. What's the thing?
the country, the land.
Okay.
Which they have been in. That was 3,000 years ago. They took inhabitants of this place that people today are saying started in 1948.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, they're
3,000 years.
they're
3,000.
conquered. Deuteronomy 28
We're going to get banned now.
actually talks about the blessings and the curses, that if they obey God, things are going to go well. If they forget God, it's going to be what they experience. So they go off in Babylon. Babylon is conquered by Persia, 540. Persia, by the way, is like Iraq area.
Babylon came from, well, Baghdad.
Yeah, so that's
Is
why.
Iraq.
Yeah, it's
So where's Persia
It's
then,
not
distinctly?
geographically correct as what we see today as Iran, Iraq. It's kind of the 2 parts. Persia's more right.
You're telling me
Babylon's
those
left.
people were fighting each other back then?
They were.
Well, what we're talking about, too, you're talking about world powers back then, too.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
this is not a small group. These are world powers.
Yeah,
dominating
these are-
powers.
Yeah.
Well, Nebuchadnezzar builds a statue of gold 90 feet high, 9 feet wide, tells everybody to bow down to him. The guy's doing well, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel chapter 1.
Yeah, all that is happening in the Babylonian captivity,
So,
Persia captivities,
time frame
Ezra,
wise, we're
or Esther.
605, they began to besiege Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And at 5, you said 586?
586.
586
the
there,
fall.
the fall of the temple. So from 605 to 535, 36, we've got the exile period. Ezra, Nehemiah, they're part of that story. You can get some of that mentioned in Chronicles. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You gonna fact
540.
check this?
Ezra and Nehemiah would be post-exile.
Yes, they are post-exile.
Part of the
Daniel
story.
and Ezekiel.
Part of the story of the
Yeah.
return.
Oh, yeah. All those
Daniel.
books.
Daniel.
So 540 is
How
when
many times
Persia,
can we make him say 540?
I know, is the conquer of Persia of Babylon. All right.
So the Persians are now the world power in charge.
Yeah.
Yep. They're kicking butt, but they have a whole different philosophy of ruling their empire. Instead of ruling empire by captive slaves, they're going to tax them. They're going to turn them back into whatever countries they came from, and they're going to be subject to the rule of the people. So they're going to rule over more from a political standpoint rather than a possession standpoint.
That's significant because of what happens next. But here's something that's really... Oh, I got all these sticky notes because I can't keep all this straight in my head. Listen to this. Isaiah chapter 45, verses 1 through 13, twice, in verse 1 and verse 13, it mentions that Cyrus, he's the Persian guy, just came to power in
540. Well,
540.
that's when he conquers Babylon.
Babylon. Prophesied in the 730. Isaiah's written over a large period of time.
That's
The
all I
lifetime
know.
of Isaiah. But the prophecy of Isaiah, a couple of hundred years before the event, calling out a man by name.
Pretty
That's
crazy,
awesome.
isn't it?
That is awesome. He wasn't even, obviously, born, definitely not in power, certainly hadn't conquered the Babylonians. And yet God says, he's going to be the guy. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. The Jeremiah 21, isn't it? Jeremiah, I got a note for that. Jeremiah 29, 10 is going to be a 70-year exile.
Yep. Which that actually goes back to the years of the they didn't let the land rest. So the year of Jubilee, they didn't follow once again the covenantal promises of 28, and so they're judged.
Deuteronomy 28.
Yep, they're judged based upon their lack of obedience for the time frame. So that's why the 70 years is given, because it's 7 generations that they didn't observe the giving back of the possessions. So that's the 70
it
years
was
captivity.
technically, and I've heard you talk about this in years past, but it was 1 year for every year they missed.
Yes.
And that was really God's judgment, God's punishment back to them.
Yep.
And the whole thing comes from idolatry, putting self over
God.
Yep.
God.
So then 520 happens. So
Confused yet?
the people of Israel are now, so 540.
Should have made a chart. Should have made a
I'm
chart.
going to
I know,
put a chart
Levi.
on the,
Where's
I'm
the
gonna
chart?
put this on the screen Sunday.
Okay.
We'll talk about it afterwards.
Persia's in charge. They send the people of Israel back, or the Jews back into Israel, their land, and they're living in the land now for about 15 years. So 535, they're back in the land, and here we come to 520, and they laid the foundations, but like they really didn't do much to it. It's like they brushed off some rocks here and there, and they're like, yeah, this is hard. We don't want to work. We're going to go build our own houses. And so 15 years goes by, and Haggai comes along, and he says, God gives him a word. And that's why it's exciting, because it's a reminder of really who they are. They've not been able to worship.
You're being hard on them.
Being hard on us, too, because there's a lot of
I think it's significant, like you mentioned, the word of the Lord. How many times did you say? 38 times?
I can't remember now.
But the word
Where's
of
your
the Lord.
sticky notes?
21 times
21
and 38
times?
note verses.
Okay.
Yeah.
To me, that's real significant, because when you think about the history you just described, so for, 70 years, they have not had corporate worship. For 70 years, like the temple had already fallen.
These people had
didn't
very
have
likely
the-
never even been there.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So this is next generation.
Right.
Like their parents, their grandparents, they have
The days of 900-year-old
passed on.
Noah is over.
the next generation is
70's
coming.
old.
And so when he says that 21 times, like to me, that's like, this is the first time a lot of these people, they've ever heard the word of the Lord. Mm-hmm. And so when it's a prophecy, like I want to see, like, we reiterate and we reinstate because we want people to understand. And I see that with Haggai. He wants us to make sure this is important.
This is not my words.
I like that.
Your parents, your grandparents, they may have known this, but you've never heard this. So I need you to understand this is the word of the Lord.
Twice in the first 10 or so verses,
Yep.
he says, pay close attention
Yep.
to this. Pay close attention to this. This is a big deal. These people had never lived there.
Yep.
So
Well,
to
not
me,
only
that's pretty
that-
interesting. But everything's been destroyed. There's a lot of work to do to resettle. This is a big deal. And
Well,
they got distracted.
And Solomon's temple was legit.
yeah.
You know, like the stone, we've seen the foundation stones of that. It's And it's big, right? Like, it's not, you
Well, but
move
not
a
only
few
that-
rocks here and there.
You got to think of their mindset too, because not only were they not engulfed, they were not surrounded by this kind of teaching, this kind of following. What were they? They were amongst the Babylonians. They were amongst the Persians, and all the gods and idolatry that brought. So it's almost a complete conversion, a complete mindset of what they were raised up.
There's the Samaritans, who are an intermingling of people groups, who are present when they first arrive in 535. When they first arrive, they get started. They lay the foundation stones, and they stop because of the criticism of them. You know, we're gonna stop this, and they bring counselors. It seems it's almost like they file lawsuits with the government to stop
Building
the,
permit.
building permits are ceased. And so, you know, that's the Artaxerxes. Okay, so now we've got Cyrus is replaced by Artaxerxes. This is confusing. In the Persian kingdom,
We need a chart.
we need a chart. Can you make a chart?
Why's everybody looking at you, Levi?
Artaxerxes he says, you know what? Maybe this is a problem. He has a different. He's not mentioned by Jeremiah as one who's going to facilitate this. That was Cyrus. He stops the work, and for the next, well, it's a 16-year process.
16,
Yeah.
We don't do anything. From a human standpoint, I get it. Right? It's easy to get distracted, especially when there's opposition. It's easy to get discouraged when we set out to do things and it doesn't go like we planned, which is always, right? And then when more than that, when you set out to do something for, in a worship sense, a spirit sense, there's going to be problems. You make a commitment to do something for the Lord, and you're going to get attacked, right? People, on prosperity teaching, we would say if you'll give to the Lord, He's going to bless you with a lot more. That's probably not how it really works in the real financial sense of our life. We are blessed. That's the point of chapter 1. We are blessed when we obey and put Him first. But that doesn't mean it's easy, right? We're still blessed. It's like the Israelites wandering around in the desert and their shoes don't wear out for 40 years. Who wants to wear the same shoes for 40 years and consider that a blessing? I want new shoes, right? And that's the blessing. But no, God says, I'll just take care of you. I'll meet your needs. I'll provide for you.
I think I still have some T-shirts that are like
Yeah,
getting
Levi.
on 20
That means
years.
you're. Oh, I thought you were saying
Not
40.
40.
I was like, what?
No,
You're over
My
40?
son
Like 20
Levi, we went hunting most boys were home. We all went hunting. And it was warmer than we anticipated. So he breaks into my old camo to put on this pair of bibs I have. They're a Realtree Bill Jordan originals.
Wow.
They're circa late 1980s. They're awesome. I said, be careful with those, right? Be careful with those special. What was I saying that for? Oh, they've lasted for 40 years. They've lasted for 40 years. That's a blessing. I mean, it is a blessing, right? We want new, we want better, and that's what prosperity would teach us in this world. The blessing is more, but not necessarily. God says, I'm going to take care of you. And they still disregarded him and sought to take care of themselves first.
So the temple thing here, I think a lot of times we don't understand this either. Because, let's just be honest, none of us are great Old Testament scholars, but the temple is a representation of God's presence amongst His people.
Right.
It gives them a distinct identity of who they are, and it defines their purpose for the world. And so the temple is more than just a building that they are supposed to have. It is the it's all those things that are wrapped up. And so whenever they're prioritizing their own interest over the glory of God, that's what they're doing here by not participating in the rebuilding of the temple and doing that. So that's why it's such a big deal of when they come back and they don't get to work, is because they're saying, you know what, like, it's cool. We've been gone for 70 years, not worshiping corporate worship. They don't have a distinct identity anymore because, they've been in all these places and they've lost their purpose. And so God is actually, it's kind of this rebirth of, I'm going to give you a new opportunity. I'm bringing you back into the land. I'm going to give you a new identity, a new purpose, and I'm going to be with you. And that is a huge thing.
That's huge.
I'm going to be with you again in your presence and make you a distinct people among all nations.
Because one of the main questions, I would say, like, happening in this period of exile and then even returning from exile is that question of where is God in all of this? Because, yeah, he removes them from everything that gave them their sense of identity and purpose. And so just naturally, they would be struggling with, where is God? What is he doing? Is he still, concerned about us as a people group? Is he still going to be faithful to the covenant of Moses and different things? And so, yeah, I mean, it's definitely like kind of losing sight of who God is and what
why
he's
would
doing.
he use Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, right? I mean, that's what the text tells us. And so they got to be questioning, what's
Those
our
are
place with him?
The enemies.
The enemies of God. And he uses them to teach the people of God a lesson. I think two significant things happen in the exile that God's achieving. And really what he uses the Babylonians for is to purge a couple of sinful issues. Number one is idolatry. Okay, that's the primary thing. But I think number two, you notice this is significant. Never again are they ruled by a king.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that part of the story? They were ruled by prophets and priests, and then they said, we want to be like the nations all around us. We want a king. And God was to be their leader. They were a theocracy, right? And so they chose to have a king. They get Saul and then David and Solomon, and it falls apart. God's purging them of that problem. And still yet today, they're not ruled by a king. Right? That is a significant change. God is saying, I am your leader. And ultimately, that's what he wants us, not governmentally. We're talking about the United States of America.
I'm going to be with you.
I'm going to be with you. He wants us to depend upon him to provide and protect, not another man.
Well, even at the end of Haggai, though, he promises...
What chapter was that?
Chapter 2.
Oh.
We're talking about chapter 1 here, not chapter 2 or 3.
We got to talk about something next week.
Oh, okay.
No, go ahead. Finish your
Well,
thought.
no, like with the kingdom, the king throne, like he gives a picture of there's still going to be someone on the throne, but we know like that comes through Jesus. So while they don't necessarily have a king on the physical throne, Zerubbabel is part of Jesus' genealogy, and so
He's at the line of David. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. There's like this Christological overtone of like, oh, is this going to be the guy? But we know it's not. It's
What was that word?
Christological overtones.
Christ.
Whoa.
Oh, logic.
That there's worth the time you spent listening right there. Christological.
That's one of them
He likes his
PhD
fancy
words.
I think the whole concept of I'm going to be with you, like he's been bringing them back to this spot for generations. And I just learned this going with you to Israel. But so like if I was going to make a chart or a graph, I would go all the way
You're
back
not
to,
though, right?
I wish
not-
we
I'm not
wish
going
we
to.
had a charter.
Somebody
graph on
might,
this.
and you may not want this, but I would actually go all the way back to Abraham and Isaac. So Abraham and Isaac, when Abraham took Isaac up, he took him up to Mount
Moriah.
and that's where he was willing to sacrifice his son, and God provides the ram, right? And so then we see through their history, they're blessed, and you get the 12 tribes from the descendants of Isaac. And then what happens? They fail. They sin. God pulls them apart. They go into slavery with Egypt. They're wandering in the desert with Moses. And eventually what we just talked about, he raises up kings, King David being one of those. So then King David, he brings the capital of Israel back to the city of David, which essentially is Jerusalem and Mount
How
Moriah.
does Trump play into that? Because he said, again, that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel.
That's for the post podcast conversation. My goodness.
It's a blessing
You're
that
right on,
Camo,
though.
I
that
put his
Camo
whole
didn't wear
history
out.
on that, and so like David,
This is a whole story.
Yeah, and David doesn't build there, but he picks the building site, and it's again believed it's Mount Moriah. It's the same place where Abraham sacrificed Isaac. Then Solomon builds this great temple, and it's standing for like 400 years before it falls, roughly.
Yeah.
Wasn't it around 1,000 BC? Wasn't it? So right around 400 years before it falls in 586.
There's a lot of dates.
There's a lot of dates, but I mean, but look what he's doing. He's bringing them back.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's
don't
preparing
lose
them for
don't
the
lose the
Messiah.
story in the dates.
Right,
The proliferation of dates. It's just, this is God's story. And he's just working to refine his people for his glory and to pave the way for the coming of the Messiah so that he can redeem and restore.
Well, that whole point of the temple, and that's what we don't understand of being
My wife said I was a temple.
Westerners, of being that's where we're going, of being Westerners, You know, because we don't understand the concept of how sacred that place was. But here's the great thing: because of Christ, as Jeff said, those of us that accept Jesus Christ, you know, we are the temple. Like, the Holy Spirit lives within us. And so that same sanctity, that same presence that would have come out of there, like, dwells within you and I.
So Matthew, like, let's bridge the connection since you guys went there. Matthew 16, Jesus says, "I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail." That's up there in
Matthew 16.
yeah,
Caesarea Philippi.
Caesarea Philippi. Thank you.
You got that in your sermon.
So he says, "I'm going to build my church." Jesus, right? So that's a unique declaration, and because they do know their Old Testament, they would have been like, well, like, what does that mean, right? Then in Matthew 28, which I can always bridge Matthew 28, kind of wrote a really long dissertation on that one.
Nerd alert, nerd alert.
Right. Matthew 28, when Jesus says, he gives them all the things that, you know, they're going to do, and he says, "And I will be with you." Yep. It is back to this Haggai of
Rich.
this right here, because the word of the Lord comes to Haggai, and it, let's see.
Take that back to
13?
Sinai.
113.
Yeah, 113. Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave the message of the Lord's people. "I am with you, declares the Lord."
Right. Sinai. Follow these commands. I will be your God. I will be with you.
And so there's these little markers or phrases that Jesus uses to tie back into promises and prophecies that lead people to purpose, identity, and salvation. And so when he says that, like, those guys would have been like, "Oh, we remember that story."
Yep.
It's pretty cool how God works and has been working to bring about his people. And he's given us a big purpose. Like, it's no longer building necessarily a building for God, but it's building his church spiritually. Like, we are to participate as believers, as his called out people, the church, to participate in God's plan to bring about a new identity and a new purpose for the kingdom of God being unfolded here.
I showed the mass listening audience my sticky notes. That's all I have for the whole sermon.
What?
3 sticky notes?
3 sticky notes. He's got it all on an iPad already. Wow.
I told you I was excited about this one. So I knew
Hey,
it
I
was
want
coming.
to do a poll on studio audience. Not studio audience, the listening audience.
No, let's just do a single. This one's on you, Stephen. Whatever you got, that's it.
Listening audience. So it's at this point there may not be anybody left. I don't know. So if you're still with us, here's the poll. We introduced that we're going to talk about Haggai. Scale of 1 to 10. 1 being completely bored and uninterested, to 10 like you are so excited. You can't wait for these podcasts and these sermons, and you've already been reading through Haggai. 10. Where are you at? Where are you at in this story? Are you excited about this, or are you just ho hum? Okay.
Is that a 9? Was that a? Oh, you're a
he's done
10.
the studio audience. Is
We
up to 10.
convinced him in 20 whatever minutes to go from a 1 to 10.
Wow.
Good job.
Hey, post it in the comments. We want to know.
We want to know where were you and where are you? Because when I got started, I was like a 2. I'm thinking, what in the world did we put this on the schedule for? Nah, I'm at least to an 8. If I had my sermon on my iPad, I don't have an iPad, but if I had my sermon on my iPad, I'd be at a 10. I'm just a little concerned yet that all these dates is. If I had a chart,
If we had a chart to
I'd
follow,
be pumped.
We'll straighten it out by Sunday.
I'll be honest. Before we came into this today, I was like a 6 to 7, and most of that was from Jason Henry, because Jason Henry
Jason
wrote
wrote
a
a
song.
song.
I know, that's what I'm saying. He's like a 12. He wrote a song for this that we're going to sing at Clay County on Sunday.
We're singing it here too.
Awesome. I didn't know that. So, but after the podcast, now I'm more like a 9.5.
We'll see if we
Jason
can
wrote
bump
a
it up.
song.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
We should have that playing in the background.
Ooh.
Ooh,
Could
yeah.
you do that?
Like,
Yeah.
could be our new theme music.
And let's not get carried away.
Thanks for joining us on the ReThink podcast as we take an exciting dive into Haggai.